Hello, welcome to World Talks. I'm Adam Jasser. NATO is boosting its defense readiness in the Arctic in response to Russia's military build-up plans. To discuss this, we're joined in Helsinki, Finland, by General Sami Nurmi, Deputy Chief of Staff for the Finnish Army.
Thank you for having me, and welcome to Finland.
Thank you. So, NATO just established the Arctic Sentry in response to Russia's military build-up in the Arctic in the far north. So my question to you is, what is Finland's contribution to this new program?
Well, there's several dimensions, of course. First of all, we're part of NATO. So if NATO is doing something, we're part of it. And this is, of course, the case for the Arctic Sentry as well. Then the other very important dimension for us is that Finland is an Arctic nation. We try to emphasize this all the time when we discuss with our allies and friends that also Arctic is not only blue waters, it's also the land area up north, north of Norway, Sweden, Finland together. We are also an Arctic part of NATO, which is really important to take into account. And we are, of course, participating in the planning process with NATO. And we will eventually see what kind of contributions on a concrete level Finland and other Nordics will have.
So at this stage, there are no specific plans?
Not yet. We are, of course, you can say that our daily business, taking care of the security and defense in the high north or Arctic, is already part of Arctic Sentry in territorial surveillance and so on. So we are doing that on a daily basis in the Finnish Defence Force. But how that will be connected to the Arctic Sentry in practical terms, so the planning is still going on.
But given the nature of your armed forces, probably you will be mostly contributing land forces rather than, let's say, Navy assets.
You're absolutely right. We do not have the blue water Navy assets as such, especially since we're waiting to receive our new naval vessels in the next few years. Land forces is the most important. Of course, we have significant air force, but that is mainly most likely of use to NATO up here in the Nordic area. And we have to remember that the Arctic Sentry is not the only sentry operation that is going on. We have the Baltic Sentry, and then of course we have the Eastern Sentry as well. So it's really important from our point of view that we coordinate these different activities as best as possible.
Well, I'm glad you're mentioning this, because my next question was going to be, is there a risk that Arctic Sentry is going to sap your ability to commit to Baltic Sentry, which, you know, has been such a hot issue last year?
I don't see that happening really. I think, of course, we have to. I think it's all of Eastern Europe, so it's important to emphasize the importance of this eastern flank when it comes to NATO, and to make sure that this kind of hype around the Arctic issues right now is not eating up the importance of this area. So. And the assets we have in the Baltic Sentry, I think, are different, and they are meant for the Baltic Sea, at least the Finnish Navy capabilities. So in that way, I think they fit together.
Some experts are arguing that there's still not unified military strategy from NATO when it comes to the Baltic Sea and now the Arctic as well. And as an example of that, they say there are separate commands in NATO for these two areas, whereas in reality this seems like the same theater, so to speak. So is there a valid argument for having a joint command for both the Arctic and the Baltic?
That's a really good question, and it's a valid discussion, of course. Maybe from a military point of view, there will always be a line somewhere. Is it in the Baltic Sea or wherever it is? The military will have to coordinate their actions. So I don't see, from a military point of level, it's such a big issue. Of course, there's the issues that we have to work together, especially in the Baltic Sea, with Joint Forces Command Norfolk and Brunsum, and being part of that. So I don't see it as big a problem as maybe sometimes people bring it up.
But I'm not a military person, you are obviously, but sometimes commanders need quick decisions. If these decisions are split between different commands, then the response time naturally gets longer. Or is that just a layman's impression?
Yeah, I would go with the latter. But I think the military will make the decisions as required. And we have to remember that there is, of course, there are different levels of when you start to take activities. For example, Article 3 is always still the basis for hopefully every country's defense in NATO, which is the national defense. So that is most likely the first thing that you will react with if there is a crisis. And then eventually you will get to Article 5. But I don't see the decision making as an issue. It's more about careful coordination of operations and activities, air, sea and land in the Baltic Sea, if we're talking about that.
Right. So speaking of coordination, obviously Finland's and Sweden's membership in NATO has changed the dynamic for Europe, but particularly in the Nordic region, where previously cooperation was limited. How far are you advanced with integration in military terms between the militaries of the Nordic countries?
Do you mean in NATO or as Nordic?
Nordics within NATO.
Okay. Well, of course, we have a long Nordic cooperation tradition. I guess it started in the 50s in Suez in the UN operation. But of course, it's a bit different than what we have today.
It's a slightly different story today.
Yeah, and then we have this Nordic defense cooperation where all the five, even Iceland, even though they don't have a military, are together. It's not an operational body, but it's an important tool to coordinate, for example, on the political level, issues on current security policy issues, or then practically develop some capabilities together. But then I would also emphasize the flexibility of the Nordic cooperation is that you can, it's totally understandable that maybe bilaterally within the Nordic family, for example, Finland and Sweden have been doing operational cooperation since 2014. And this is, of course, really significant when you think of the situation today. And then if you look at geography, Finland, Sweden, Norway, especially in the north, are logical partners to work together. So I think everything we do within the Nordic family better serves NATO. It facilitates NATO's actions in the north as well.
Politicians from the region very often speak about this. They say, you know, together as we're all small countries, but together we're already a formidable military force. But the devil is in the details, and the question of integration and, let's say, ability to use 350 planes that you combined have simultaneously in an operation is another thing. So my question is, you know, in your assessment, how far is this integration gone? Is it like 70% of your target, or is it 50% of your target?
That's difficult to say. I often get asked the question, when is Finland's NATO integration ready? And my answer is never, because I feel that now that we have been in NATO almost 3 years, and looking at some of the older members that have been there 76 plus years, they're still developing their integration into NATO. So this is one way to answer it. But I think because of the tight, close cooperation that the Nordics have had, I think we are at a good position. I won't go into percentages, but I think we are, as a package, able to serve NATO as well, quite well, air, sea and land.
Would you be able to operate independently of NATO as a Nordic group? Independently of NATO. Let's say there is some kind of a crisis.
Absolutely, especially bilaterally. That is something that we have worked on with Sweden, for example, for over 10 years. So there was a political decision in 2014 that we would deepen our cooperation to be able to handle all kinds of military crises, pending political decision. But still we have since then been developing plans and actions together with Sweden.
So to sum up, this is primarily concerning the far north and the land exposure there and the Baltic Sea.
Yes. So all of the Nordics, I would say.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So now I'd like to talk a little about the situation on the front line and Russia's posture in general in Europe, but also in Ukraine. There have been some reports that the Ukrainian forces are making some advances and that Russians are suffering huge personnel losses. But at the same time, your minister in Munich said, the defense minister said, that Russia is building up in the north. So I'm a little confused because how can you suffer losses and lose territory in Ukraine, but at the same time building up in the north?
It's a relevant issue to be confused about. Maybe it's to explain it is, of course, as you said earlier, since Sweden and Finland joined NATO, it radically changed the military geographics up here in the north, and of course it's a big issue for Russia. They will have to react to it eventually. Right now, mainly their land forces are very, very busy in Ukraine, and we see it at our borders that it is, you can't say empty, but a lot of the forces are not there. But at the same time, you can see, as they have announced that they will build up the force later on, you can see that they are doing moderate preparations in order to be able to receive the forces back to the areas closer to our borders, especially land forces. So building infrastructure moderately, I would say, at the moment. But then you have to remember that still today, and for Finland always, Russia will be a military threat. And there is a significant air force and navy still in the area, despite the war in Ukraine. But the land forces are very occupied there. But they are preparing to bring it back.
So in other words, you're saying that once the war in Ukraine is over, the pressure up north can increase from Russia?
That's a
your assessment of
fair assessment, yes.
Right.
And very important point for us is that to make understand that Ukraine, however it ends, does not solve the Russia issue for us.
Right. So do you believe that Russia can rebuild its potential, or it still has it? It's just not. It's just hard to understand for lay people, how come this mighty Russian military is bogged down in Ukraine, and yet everyone in Northern Europe is so concerned about potential confrontation.
Well, it's history and the experience we have had, and well, both our countries have had it, and Russia always seems to come back. You know, but then you start talking about time frames, what it can do today, and I would say even today it's a significant military power, even though it's bogged down in Ukraine. How quickly it will be able to reach the level it had before Ukraine, and then not even to talk about the modernization, which will probably take a bit longer time. But okay, general assessment has been that to reach the level they had before Ukraine, it's 3 to 5 years. A lot of people are talking about that. But that's a guessing game, you know. The point is that they're able to do something even today, but they will eventually build up so that they are ready again later on to meet the challenges up north and to protect their interest.
So if this is the consensus analysis, then what is Finland's response in practical terms?
Well, Finland is a member of NATO.
Okay, that's the political side of it.
And we have a strong national defense, and we are modernizing it and building it up and being a better ally. Our defense is stronger than ever before.
It's stronger than ever before?
I would say so.
What makes you so confident?
NATO and our national defense together. Earlier we only had the national part.
Okay, so there's the second stage that you mentioned.
Absolutely.
Earlier. Right. Okay, and how do you? What is your assessment in general of how the war in Ukraine is going? Is this a stalemate, or is this? What is your assessment?
It seems to be a stalemate, and of course, really sad. We're reaching 4 years next week, I think, and long-lasting, horrific war in Europe. Nobody, I think, believed that could happen, but it has happened, and it is already 4 years. Stalemate, yes. Very tough for especially, of course, the Ukrainians. Big misjudgments from the Russian side, I think, strategically. I think they were expecting it to be a short war, but here we are 4 years long.
Do you believe the Ukrainian army is still, formidable enough and resilient enough to carry on? If there's no peace deal in the coming months, can they carry on for another year or two?
I definitely hope so, and of course then everybody would hope that the war would end as soon as possible with a reasonable deal for especially the Ukrainians. Of course, very dependent of the Western aid, military aid, as far as we have seen, but you really have to take your hats off and admire how tough they have been against a much bigger opponent.
I bet that as head of strategy here, you have seen these reports, probably better reports than the media reports, but the media reported that there was a recent NATO exercise in Estonia where 10 Ukrainian drone operators basically disabled an entire NATO brigade within half a day. What kind of lessons did you personally draw from this exercise?
Well, I don't know if this exercise I would go so much into detail, but of course we have to very carefully follow the situation in Ukraine and take all the lessons learned that they have as are suitable for our environment and our defense forces and so on. That you cannot copy everything as such because it's a different situation, different starting point and so on.
So what are the lessons?
Well, the lessons are definitely biggest. Of course, everybody's talking about drones. I'm quite tired of drones, but we have millions of drone experts now around Europe and the world. Very important new capability, absolutely, and we have to look at that closely. But this is a game changer. You still see that there's these traditional capabilities that Russia is using. They are very important as well. Tanks, artillery, number of men. That's the old stuff, and then you have the new stuff. So the right balance is really the important thing to find. Then, of course,
excuse me. So, are you saying people are exaggerating the significance of the drone warfare at the expense of the more traditional ones?
Personally, sometimes yes. Personally, but I was going to say also the flexible use of technology. And dual technology especially is something that we have to closely see how the Ukrainians are able to do it, speeding up acquisition processes and to buy the material that they need, ammunition, guns and so on. Use of mobile technology in assistance, the total defense kind of in practice, what they are living through on a daily basis. There's a lot to learn and to use in the future. And of course, we're working very closely also with the Ukrainians on these issues.
So is the procurement any easier these days than it used to be?
Unfortunately, if you talk about Finland nationally, it's still we have a lot to do. But we have to remember it's different. The country is at war. Then maybe the rules and laws are a bit different than what they are when you're not at war. So you cannot expect to, you still have to follow the competition and so on to some extent. But I think what we are looking at, you have to have some ways to with good reasoning, to expedite the acquisition issues and so on. So if you have a good reason to buy something quicker, you should be able to do it. And maybe even take risk.
So is there anything going on in this respect?
We are talking to the MOD as the defense forces and also the other ministries and looking if we have possibilities to develop the legislation.
And how is Finland's participation in the SAFE program? Is this something important to you or you're not
absolutely.
Really keen on that?
EU opportunities are there and SAFE as well is another useful tool. We are looking at 1 billion euros, but of course you have to remember it's a loan and you have to pay it back. So it's not free money, but definitely a possibility to develop especially our land forces, which is next focus for our defense development.
Land forces, why land forces?
We're a land force country. We have had strategic acquisition programs, F-35s now. We're getting 64 of them. I think the first 4 are already in Texas now, or maybe in even training. And then also the Navy, as I mentioned, is getting 4 new corvettes. Small country, we cannot do everything at the same time. So now we are emphasizing next few, actually quite a few years, the land forces and land domain, together with, for example, Poland and also other European countries are showing interest.
That was my next question. When it comes to the drone wall and some other defense spending and procurement, do you see greater scope for cooperation with other eastern flank countries, such as Poland?
Absolutely.
So how is it going to manifest itself?
Poland is I think we will have a central role with Poland and maybe Germany when it comes to land forces development in Europe, acquisition and also other sides. And you know, our Prime Minister had this Eastern Flank Watch initiative. As there as well, Finland and Poland will have a central role. So there's a lot of possibilities. We have regular visits with the military leadership with Poland, and I would say that this bilateral cooperation is a rising star for the future, really important to us. And of course the Baltics as well. We never forget them, but Poland and Finland definitely important in the future.
When we were recently in Tromsø in Norway for the Arctic Frontiers Conference, and the security was the main topic, there was a lot of focus on Svalbard Islands, which are, you know, no man's land, although theoretically under Norway's sovereign rule. And it was pointed out to me that there's a similar story here between Finland and Sweden with the Alland Islands, that it's a potential exposure to Russian hybrid attacks or worse. And you know, their status as semi-autonomous and demilitarized has been discussed in Finland and in Sweden. Are you, as a strategy planner for the defense forces, are you concerned about the status of the Alland Islands?
No. It's okay, as you said, Alland Islands are demilitarized, and we have limited possibilities as military to involve ourselves in the area during peacetime. We have the Coast Guard permanently on the island. That is, of course, part of the Ministry of Interior. But Alland Islands is part of Finland, and it's a responsibility of Finland to defend Alland Islands in case of war. So there's a clear responsibility, and of course we have planned that and working really closely with the Åland authorities on these issues. And the positive thing, I would say, is that security issues are discussed more on the island as well, that they have concerns, or not concerns, but they're interested.
So the local community is finally seeing this as a risk?
Yes. Well, not as a risk, but as they want to know how the security will be secured if something happens. And this is what we exchange information on more and more. And I think it's a real positive thing. The interesting thing is, of course, the original agreements concerning Åland Islands are really old. So
1921, I think.
Even older. If you try to call the signatories, you have the Ottoman Empire and Kingdom of Sardinia. So it's hard to find those telephone numbers these days. But there's no discussion about changing the status of Åland Islands.
And there's no need from your perspective to do that?
No. I think we have a clear role. And also Svalbard up north, even though it's Norwegian issue, but to compare it, of course, Åland Island, like Gotland, is critical for the Baltic Sea. But Svalbard and the gap between the Svalbard and Nordics is maybe even more strategically important because of the nuclear assets that Russia has in the Kola Peninsula and the movement there.
Right. Last year was the year of high-intensity hybrid attacks in the Baltic Sea, cables, all sorts of mischief, so to say, by Russia or Russia-linked entities. Do you see this intensity continuing this year?
Absolutely, yeah. This is what the Russians do. They are very innovative and they find new things to do. And instead of going to an open military conflict, they will. My assessment is that they continue with this hybrid activities, and the attribution is really difficult in this hybrid, and this is one of the genius thinking behind the hybrid activities. So
what kind of activities are you talking about now?
Well, as I said, they're really good. I would say they continue the same. Of course, we have had the cables, as you said, energy infrastructure, water plants. There's a lot of possibilities, and one thing that is really worrying right now is, of course, not hybrid as such, but it's the shadow fleet in the Baltic Sea, and you will probably later on see the Baltic Sea with the ice situation today. So these not in so good shape tankers in the shadow fleet are going back and forth. So oil catastrophe could be more than probable in the future.
Yeah, but everyone is talking about this, but we see no action. So what should happen from your point of view? What should happen?
Yeah.
What should be the response?
It's a really, really challenging international law question, law of the sea. What are the rights of different countries to react when a vessel is in the international water? As we have seen, it's really, really difficult.
But Finland did some bold decisions.
Yeah.
So yeah,
but those were good examples. I think the important thing is to have a really good situational awareness, what is going on. Baltic Sentry in this respect is really important, that it's there, also monitoring and showing NATO presence in the Baltic Sea. So how many of these ships cross every day? Oh my gosh, you have to ask the real experts, but tens, I would say. I don't know, at least probably 50 or so. Shouldn't they be followed by navies of all the Baltic countries, on regular basis? Russia is following some of them, and then of course we are monitoring the Baltic Sea together with the other Baltic Sea nations from our nations. That's the best we can do at the moment. But then of course if you see an action, you have to try to react. But the law of the sea, international waters, sets its limitations. And this is something that we just have to figure out together with the allies. Do you think this is something that NATO should codify in some, not just strategy, but maybe specific action plan? Really tough question, I would say, for NATO, because then you broaden out the area of responsibility. Baltic Sea, I think all of us maybe should, in the Baltic Sea area, discuss it first and see if we can, Danish Straits, the Baltic Sea itself, Gulf of Finland, what are the different activities that we can do. Jeff has, joint expeditionary force could play a role, something like that. How could? Well, to discuss, because it's the Baltic countries, Nordic countries, and the UK. So is there something that we can do as Jeff nations in that respect? In your assessment, is there enough coordination, sort of real coordination, not in political terms, but in response terms to these shadow fleet tankers going? I think in terms of quick response, quick decision, what to do, how to handle. I think there's enough, at least there's enough discussion and thinking behind it. But what we are able to do, there are limitations. And that's just a democratic system that we're most of us trying to follow and respect. And that's what makes it difficult. And so where's that room for improvement within the democratic system and sticking to principles? What is the next thing that should be done? Find a way to set rules for how we function together in the international waters, for example. If we're talking about the shadow fleet, is there a solution that we can somehow together make it safer, and then of course put the pressure politically on Russia to stop these activities, which are breaking the sanctions in practical terms every day. Right. Well, I've been asking you a lot of questions that have been on my mind. So let me finish with a question. What doesn't let you sleep in the night? Oh, that's really, I would say, of course, on a bit lighter side, that how Finland will do in the hockey Olympics.
That's very important, yes.
Yeah, so that is maybe.
But once that's over,
once that's over, let's say I would say that maybe the fact that Europe takes defense seriously, and all the European countries understand that the situation is what it is, and invest in their defense, and we can do a lot more together than we do today. And
so you think it's still not adequate?
I think there's a lot more to do. And I mentioned Article 3, national defense, so that would be the starting point, that everybody looks at their national defense. Is it up to level that is needed today? And then we are much stronger when it comes to Article 5 if we have our national defense in order. So maybe more European nations take more responsibilities is important. And this has nothing to do with the political turmoil with the US administration.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned this, because my last question is, are you confident that the Nordic countries, the eastern flank, can manage Russia if the US was to scale back its participation significantly?
Well, I don't see that happen. I don't see that as a relevant discussion, that whether the US would withdraw. At least from my experience from the military point of view, our bilateral cooperation with the US and within NATO is continuing as planned. Of course, there are slight, small changes, but still we are very happy with the cooperation we are having with the US. But having said that, we still need the Europeans to take more responsibility, especially in order to be the first responders if needed. But still, I think the alliance is strong together as it was before.
General, thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thank you for asking the difficult questions.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for watching. This was World Talks. I'm Jasser.